Hey everyone, Dr. Adam Harcourt here, and today I want to talk about nutrition and migraine. This is a question we get constantly because the reality is the patients that I work with have tried 50 different diets before I've ever seen them, right? And they've tried everything under the sun, anything that somebody's told them. And the reality is a lot of those diets can be really, really helpful, right? There's a reason that people do them. It's not just for fun. And so what I think is really important to understand is that there are tons of things that can influence migraine as far as dietary goes. Some we know for sure deal with migraine. There's others that are going to be individualized to each person. So I remember when I first started doing nutrition and migraine, I had people come in and say, you know what, it's the weirdest thing. I cut out all this crazy stuff, but you know what really flares me up? Pineapples. So pineapples, what? And so we see this type of stuff all the time where it's carrots or pineapples or apples or whatever. And it's not something that's traditionally associated with migraine, but for that person, it tends to be something that flares them up. And so what we try to do is start with a baseline of what does the research say is the best possible thing you can do for migraine. And we get patients all the time that have tried, ketogenic, or they've tried gluten-free, or they've worked with a nutritionist or whatever. And again, all that stuff can be really great, but unless you're specializing in migraine itself, there's very little changes and nuances that make a really, really big difference. So for example, one of the things that I really harp on with migraine is blood sugar regulation. And this is something a lot of people aren't familiar with. And so I make a really big push to make sure that blood sugar stays nice and stable throughout the day, because those spikes and dips that can happen from eating a relatively healthy diet but not paying attention to the blood sugar can be more devastating than if you just ate the dairy or the gluten or whatever it is that you're avoiding. So again, there's things like that that are really, really specific. The other thing is new research is coming out all the time. So just about a year or two ago, there was a great paper that came out on the genetics of migraine and nutrition. And so now we know that there's certain foods that maybe we wouldn't have associated with migraine that can genetically be predispositioned to make you have migraine. So for example, one that I wasn't familiar with at first, this is years ago, was citrus. And so I have some patients now that we find, man, they cut out lemons and limes and grapefruit and things like this, and they get tremendously better, right? It's a genetically mediated problem, whereas most of the time, why would you cut out lemons, right? It just seems silly. And so there's a number of different things like that that we address in our migraine diet. So again, the things that I always like to throw out there for most people that we're not working with one-on-one, gluten, dairy, caffeine, and alcohol, right? Those are the ones those are the big four. And if you can cut those out, I can tell you, you're gonna do really good things for yourself. Because again, think of diet and migraine the same way we think of migraine in general. Think of diet like a bucket. If you cut out gluten, and gluten's only one of the things that's filling up your nutrition migraine bucket, then it's not gonna look like it's helpful. But if you have gluten, dairy, and say alcohol that are all contributing equally, now you cut all of them out and you see a good change. Whereas if you just cut them out individually, you don't really see much of anything happening. All right, so that's really important to remember. The other thing, and I'm going to put it out there, I'll probably do a whole video just on this, is caffeine. I fight with so many people on caffeine, and I'll have to do a video on it just because there's so many ins and outs. But I can tell you right now, the people that get off caffeine, you're gonna have a bell curve shaped regression, which means when you first get off caffeine, the first day is kind of okay, you're just tired, but then usually the second, third, fourth day can be kind of rough, right? You get more headaches, you're fatigued. So I recommend doing that on a weekend when you can just rest and zone out. After you get past about the fourth or fifth day, you start to level out. So now you don't have that spike in the morning or the crash in the afternoon. You start to actually feel okay. And that's where most people get stuck, is they almost felt better, but they got stuck at the top of the hill, said, forget this, I'm staying on the caffeine. So again, something I highly recommend to get off of. So again, just summing all this up, think of it kind of like a bucket, right? There can be many different things that are contributing. It doesn't mean that just cutting out one food will fix your migraines. The other thing is, now if you even take that migraine bucket or that nutrition bucket, that is still just a piece of the migraine bucket. So some patients will eat perfectly and still not notice a huge change symptomatically because maybe nutrition was only filling up their bucket 10 or 15%. Well, that's 10 or 15% that'll still help to reduce your migraine days if you're doing it with the musculoskeletal, the hormonal, and the neurological rehab. Finally, I want to mention that there's a whole other video we do on hormones, but nutrition is actually kind of the base of what we do of our hormonal treatment. Because a lot of hormonal imbalances that we find, whether it's over-aromatization of testosterone to estrogen, or an upregulation of DHEA, or all these different weird things, a lot of times the best treatment for that is anti-inflammatory diets, right? Things that you're doing to avoid glutens or dairies or allergens or sensitivities or things like that. So again, we use the nutrition as a base so that when we layer on the hormonal side, we just have to tweak it a little bit. So that's why I'm really, really passionate about the nutrition. Again, even if you tried 50 different things, it's a very integral part of the recovery and, again, moving down the migraine spectrum. So I hope this was really helpful. And if you have questions, let us know. I always love to answer questions about nutrition to make sure we can all get on the same page.